Hello everyone, my name is Robert Sawyer. I'm a consultant with IBIS. I want to thank you first off and foremost for allowing me to share your time today. And so let's go ahead and get started. Looks like a lot that we're going to be covering, but in reality when we get started it'll hopefully be as seamless as possible. I wanted to briefly cover business intelligence just for some added perspective, because what a lot of people don't realize is that reporting is a valuable tool of business intelligence, which is something also that IBIS specializes in. We're going to talk about the GP environment overall, just an overall picture and understanding. We're going to cover some of the advantages of Excel Report Builder. We'll talk how to basically create a report through a SQL View. And then also, for those that might not be familiar with what a pivot table is, define it, talk about the functionality, and then actually show you how to implement that with Excel Report Builder. And also, all the callers are muted at this point, so we'll be able to take questions at the end. Okay, so what is business intelligence? It's definitely not like the picture insinuates. It's not a reference to espionage. I've also heard some people refer to it as an oxymoron, but interestingly enough, it's been around since 1958, whenever Hans Loon wrote a IBM journal. He defined it as the ability to apprehend the interrelationships of presented facts in such a way as to guide actions towards a desired goal. Quite a mouthful. Howard Dresner, more recently, he summarized it as concepts and methods to improve decision making using fact support systems. So as you can see, the terms have varied and they continue to vary. It's a content-free term, and what I simply mean by that is it means many things to many people. There is unfortunately a lacking common definition, but I hope as a whole, as we kind of cover some of the background and what Excel Report Builder does, that amongst us at least we can have a common understanding of what BI is, at least to the small and medium-sized businesses. And lastly but not least, quite often what I see is business intelligence being misassociated with either a DBA, database administrator, or an IT department. So we'll talk a little bit more about why that's actually the wrong classification. So the business of BI. As you can see, information technology is just a small portion of BI, business intelligence. A large portion of that is a combination of business and management. It gives you an opportunity to make better decisions when you have actually the right information to analyze. A lot of times, because we live in such a information-driven world, data-driven world, sometimes it's difficult to get that information. Sometimes it's difficult to get the information that you need in the right content or in the right format. It can be time-consuming. Trying to contact an IT department based on a particular report that you might need is difficult. So there is, at times, it sounds, I guess, like a novel concept, but actually grasping and being able to harness the power of BI can be difficult. If you are able to, and we'll talk a little bit about today on how we're able to do that through Excel Reporter and GP, you can detect trend analysis, something as simple as season variability. It can help you with more efficient planning. It can give you not only the trees view, but the forest, the strategic and tactical viewpoints. And just remember, IT, I refer to it more as IT being the backbone of the equation and not necessarily the end-all be-all. So when it comes to BI for the small and medium-sized business, and I think just the way that the nature of BI as a whole, for different groups, for different levels of organizations, it's going to mean different things. So my interpretation of based on what I've seen at IBIS with the customers that we do business with is it's really having the right information at the right time using the right tool. But here's the key: according to the resources you have available. Whenever you talk about business intelligence from a large enterprise, multi-billion-dollar company, a lot of times obviously their budgets are going to be different. They might have a sea of analysts. They might have more, I guess you could say, accessibility to tools and so forth. That's not the reality of most small and medium-sized businesses. So according to the resources you have available, as far as what today is concerning, is going to be Excel Report Builder, but it might not have what appears to be the Lexus appeal of some of the larger tools and names that you've heard of before, but it has all the functionality that you need. So a lot of times when it comes to the small and medium-sized businesses, you find yourself wearing many hats. You have to be more resourceful. You're lacking that whole sea of analysts that maybe some of the larger companies have, and so a lot of the business intelligence that the small and medium-sized businesses need is a self-service BI. So as you can tell here, where does Smart Lists and Excel Reports Builder fit into, I guess you could say, the triangle of what we present regarding BI reporting tools, self-service BI? It's right there in the middle. And actually this is from a associate that published a more recently book on GP reporting, which we'll touch on the very end. So when it comes to the GP environment, and I see that there's a little bit of delay, so I'll go ahead and slow down just a small bit. When it comes to the GP environment, and the only reason why that I'm kind of covering some of the background is to give you some added perspective, kind of let you understand what all goes behind the scenes from the front end of what you actually interact with, and then how it actually all comes together and eventually turns into some type of meaning. So with the GP environment, if you can see the source systems, you can just imagine this is where your GP databases are going to be. This is where you're making your different entries. That information is going to be stored in a SQL database. You might have heard of the term SQL, structured query language. Not really important to get technical at this point, but that's where all your transactions are going to be stored. On the very opposite end, where you see Excel, that's going to be, for lack of better terms, the viewer or the tool that we're going to use to access that information in a way that's going to keep you from having to learn SQL language. It's not so much that it's not an added tool or a beneficial tool to learn, but a lot of times in your day-to-day lives you don't have the time to sit there and think about how to structure a query, how to join tables, and all that other technical term. So we'll explain today on how Excel, through the Excel Report Builder, will actually do a lot of those things behind the scenes and present that information right there on your desktop without actually knowing what's going on the back end. But I just want to kind of give you an overall perspective. Okay, so briefly talking about some of the advantages of Excel Report Builder. A lot of you, if you have experience with GP, you're familiar with the Smart List Builder. So it's not too dramatically different. As I mentioned before, it does simplify creating SQL syntax, which just mentioning SQL and syntax in the same sentence makes a lot of people cringe. It reduces time to distribute reports, and this is especially important when we're limited in our time. If it's placed on a shared network folder, which I think most people are familiar with, this allows you to not only control one version of the truth, but it allows that the distribution of your reports to be real time as far as when the data is changed or there's any changes in your data and the report is refreshed. It's a real-time report. It provides information to people without access to GP. Even internally at IBIS, not everyone has access to our GP system, but we might need some various information from GP to make different types of decisions. So the information, you might ask, well, how is that with regards to security? As long as you're in the Active Directory, you can be given access to an Excel report built off of Excel Report Builder, and it gives you all the information that you need because it's pulled from the actual GP database. And as I've already kind of touched on, security is controlled in the Active Directory and database roles. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about it a little bit more, and then we're going to actually start diving in, and I'm going to show you more specifically on what it is instead of just kind of killing you through PowerPoint. So default access to Excel Report Builder, it's going to be automatically turned off except for a couple of different roles. More than likely, as you log into GP, you're not going to be at an SA role or a power users role. And access is going to be enabled, as you can see, by GP tools, setup, system, and security tasks. And what I'm going to do is just show you instead of talking about it. Okay, so if you go into the tools and then setup and then system and security tasks, actually setup, system, and security tasks. You can either name a new task, or there's a lot already here that's provided, and it already has them in different categories. So what I did was, at the very bottom, I've already went ahead and named a different task ID, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to also select the Smart List Builder permissions. So from the product, I'm going to select Smart List Builder, which is okay, and then the type, I'm going to select Smart List Builder permissions, and then the series, I'm going to select Excel Report Builder. As you can tell here, this is, and I know that you won't have a task ID named webinar, but I just want to use this as an example. This is where you would actually control and add a layer of security on when you grant somebody, based on a particular task ID, what they're going to have access to do. If you don't want them having the ability, obviously, to overwrite data connections or intercalculating fields and so forth, as far as when they publish the reports, then these are some of the options that you wouldn't want to have selected. And then also, going back into the Smart List Builder, we'll go back to Tools, Setup, System, and then now we're going to look at, just real quickly, the security roles. These are all the predefined roles. Well, let's just say, for example, because we just now went ahead and assigned a new task ID, let's just go ahead and look at the warehouse manager. And as you can tell, there are already some security task IDs, and they have the options selected just like we did. And you can see right here, webinar is basically the role that we just created, the task ID. It would give us access to all the options available. These others will have different options. So just to kind of show you the flow of things, of once you create a task ID, how you would actually assign that role. Okay, so now, before we deploy Excel reports, it's recommended that you create two separate folders, the security permissions, and these are, when I throw out some technical terms, I'm not assuming that everybody understands, but I want to go ahead and use the language that if you don't have an understanding, you can contact your network administrator and he'll fully understand what I mean. So this at least gives you some good reference notes, so when you ask the question, you can go ahead and mention specifically. On these two folders, you're going to need to have them read-write enabled. We recommend, just for the naming convention and easy to find, that you name one of the folders reports, the other one data connections. And if it's in a shared location, which I think most of you are familiar with, then this is where everyone, once you have modified or published a report, everyone that has access based on their security roles will be able to see and interact with. Okay, so let's look at real quickly on deploying the Excel reports. I'm not going to go through the whole deployment process because I've already deployed them, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where they can actually be found. So you go to Tools, Setup, System, and Reporting Tools Setup. Your screen might look different. I'm operating with GP 2010. So as you can tell here, I already have a reports directory named. So going into actually documents, here are the different locations that I mentioned before. I've already named those. And essentially all that you're going to do is just to deploy the reports at this point. So pretty simple. It seems a little bit complicated at first. It's not very much of a daunting task. I don't know if necessarily you're going to have access to this level of ability to deploy your reports and so forth, but at least you have a familiarity of what goes on behind the scenes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about accessing Excel reports. It's pretty simple. There's a way that you can access Excel reports through GP besides what I'm about to show you. There's a couple of different ways you can access Excel reports. For example, through GP Tools, Smart List Builder, Excel Report Builder. Excel Report Builder will take you to where you can actually build a report. And then there's also on the Administration tab, if you click on Excel Reports, and this is if you've already deployed the Excel reports, you will see a lot of the reports and they'll be labeled by company already where you can gain access to them. And these are just out-of-the-box reports, nothing modified. Okay, we're going to briefly talk about, I don't want to get very technical, but we're going to briefly talk about database permissions. The first recommendation, I would say, just contact your network administrator. I just kind of want you to have a brief understanding of the background. Database roles, whenever you do deploy the Excel reports, they're going to be created, and I'm going to be able to show you this in SQL Server Management Studio. Granting access is going to require a Windows login. I know this is sounding a little bit technical, but bear with me, it's not going to be as difficult as it sounds. And the Windows Active Directory group is what's going to control adding individual users. So just real quickly, now this is SQL Server Management Studio. I know that some of you may or may not have access to this particular program. If you do, it's going to be found under All Programs, Microsoft SQL Server, depending on what version that you have, and then SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS. If I expand this particular instance, you can see I have different levels of databases, or not different levels, but different named databases. The particular one that we're going to, for today's webinar, look at is 2. And if we look at, for example, security, we expand that, and then look at roles. As you can tell here, this is particular roles that are deployed once you deploy Excel reports. And what this does is allows you to control what people can view. So as an example, the power user has access to essentially every report that is available. So if you want to add somebody to this particular role, all you would do is select add, and I'm going to use myself as an example. And this is if they're on the Active Directory. Now, again, this very well might be something, depending on how your company is structured, that the network administrator will do, but just to kind of give you a brief overview. Okay, we've already went through the reporting tool setup. Let's go ahead and talk about creating an Excel report. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through, I'm going to use fixed assets as an example. So I'm going to go to Tools, Smart List Builder, Excel Report Builder, Excel Report Builder. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and name a report just for today. webinar, but this one actually is already contained. So what I'm going to do is, just for the sake of walking everybody through everything, is I'm going to go ahead and just create it from scratch. So again, we're going to name it webinar just for the sake of today's purposes. Okay, now we're going to add a table. One thing I didn't mention before, and I want to kind of jump back real quickly if I could, back to this, the main portion of GP here. Hold on just one second. If we go to Tools, Setup, let's see, and then Security, this is what's going to control some of the things that we're going to have access to, such as which SQL tables we're going to have access to. This is a particular database. What views, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But without accessing or granting access to these particular tables or the views, when we go to create the report, you're not going to be able to see those things. So it's very important that, again, just real quickly, Tools, Smart List Builder, and then Security, SQL Table Security. It's important that whatever particular role that you're working with, that you make sure that you are on the right database, you have the right table selected, and that you also have the right view selected. Okay, so now, because I went ahead and already selected the right roles, I mean not roles, but right particular views, and tables and views, we're going to go ahead and get started on building a basic Excel report. We're going to use fixed assets in this example. So we're going to add fixed assets. It's going to be financial, and we're going to do the asset general information master. Go ahead and click Save. As you can see, this presents a view where you can choose what of these particular fields do you want to display. What I'm going to do, go ahead and is add one more additional table. Again, fixed assets, financial, and we're going to add the asset book master, and we're going to make this equals. This equals is actually referring to a join, so your two choices here are either left outer or equals. Equals is basically saying that in this table has to match any particular field where it exists here, has to also equal in this field, or excuse me, this table, or it will not display. If it's a left outer join, essentially what that means is even if it's not found in this other table that we're joining, it's still going to display. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add, this is how the tables are linked, or I guess you could say the relationship. So we're going to add asset index and asset index. Save it here, save it here, and now what we haven't done just yet is we're going to go in and we're going to check what particular fields do we want to display. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that if you highlight each one of these, it'll change which fields will be displayed. So I'm going to start off with the asset general information master. I'm going to go ahead and select asset ID suffix, asset description, asset class ID, location ID, acquisition date, acquisition cost, and then if you scroll down just a little bit, what you can see is there'll be obviously some more choices here. But let's go ahead and look at the asset book master, and we're going to select the book index, the place and service index, depreciation begin date, original life years and days, depreciation to date, And let me just say that this is a particular report that I'm creating, but any field that you want, either one or many, that's up to you. So I don't want to necessarily paint the picture as if in order for this report to work, you have to follow these exact steps. You can choose what particular fields that you want to display, and that's completely up to you. Scroll down just a little bit more, and I'm going to add a couple more fields, and then we'll be finished with, at least at this point, creating a basic report. Okay. Now, at this point, we can save it. If you look back, the report, using the lookup, you can see the report has been saved. We can publish the report. And I'll explain also what that, whenever you publish a report with the view, what that's actually doing on the back end. And I'm not going to put it in the reports library just for the sake of today so we can quickly get to it. I'm just going to put this on my desktop. So desktop here, and then also desktop here, and then publish. Now, flipping to my desktop, here are the two reports. You want to enable the content, and this information is from the report that we just created, and if information was to change, all you would have to do is just refresh, and this would be pulling information directly from the transaction occurring in the SQL, excuse me, GP database. Okay, so now let's talk about defining a SQL view. What is a SQL view? Just real quickly to give you some background perspective. It's a virtual table, a stored query. It does allow you to restrict users to specific information, maybe that they don't need access to others. So you can specify different rows and columns as we were going through and displaying in the report that we just built. It joins columns. If you can recall, when we used either the left or the equals, that was creating a join for multiple tables. And it also aggregates information. So creating a SQL view was pretty simple. We've already actually done that. And I'm going to show you, if you can recall, that view that we created was called webinar. And I made it so blatantly obvious it wouldn't be that difficult for me to find as I'm kind of moving all things around. But again, logging into, if you have access, and I'm just kind of giving you some background and perspective, SQL Server Management Studios. Then you find the GP company database, and then if you expand that, you look at views, you'll see that webinar was created. Now, it doesn't really seem like it was all that special, any kind of magic what we actually did, but I want to show you also what it would take in order for you to actually do the exact same if you knew SQL script. So this is what, when we joined the tables, when we selected particular things to display, this is all what's going on behind the scenes. So I thought this was pretty neat, because what this enables you to do from a GP end user standpoint is, it's always helpful to know some type of SQL script or some basic SQL understanding. But a lot of times, if you don't have the time and you just need particular types of information and you don't have the time to wait for somebody to either assist you or somebody from your IT department to create a particular view, then you can do it yourself. And this is kind of referring back to that self-service BI. So this is all the, I guess you could say, the things that are going on transparent to you whenever you do create that report. And it wouldn't allow me to publish it without the view. This is the view that was published. And it's also, this is the information that will be from this particular view, information that can be displayed. But as you can see here, and this is the reason why we have the Excel report interface, This is not the most friendly, a little bit difficult to try to analyze. You could click here, right click, copy it all with the headers, import it into Excel, but you're adding a lot of extra steps unnecessarily when all that same information from the report that we just created is right here. We just went over the location of the views. Now, creating a SQL View based report, it's not too dramatically different than what we've already done. I mean, there are different ways to go about doing certain things, and let me show you. Again, going back to Tools, Smart List Builder, Excel Report Builder, Excel Report Builder. This is something that I've already created, and this actually comes from an associate at IBIS named David Duncan that created this particular view. And what I want to do is show you real quickly that this view is something that you don't necessarily have to go through Excel Report Builder in order to create a view. You can create a view in SQL Server Management Studio, but then as long as, again, going back to what you grant access to both the tables and views, as long as you have access to these particular views, then you can also use that as a basis to publish a report. And as you can see here, what happened is we just add a SQL Server table, and instead of selecting the table, you select the view, and in this instance, it's the paid invoices. And you notice that it's just a view. The view itself already contains joins. So now if we just want to publish this report, and this is basically publishing an Excel report off of a view, a SQL view. I've already created it on my desktop, but just to go through and show you. Paid invoices. And this is, I'll jump ahead just a small bit because what I'm going to do is show you, this is actually showing you some pivot table functionality. So let me backtrack just a small bit here. That's the example on how to publish a, okay, so that was publishing a SQL View based report. And before we jump to the pivot table, which I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to access a pivot table, just kind of want to, a lot of times what I've noticed, and I think we're all guilty of it in our own different professions, but especially when it comes to dealing with information technology, there's a lot of different acronyms and terms that people use as if you should already know. I haven't always known what a pivot table is, but just in case there's somebody else there that used to be like I was at one point in time, a pivot table is just an Excel's view, or I guess you could say an Excel way of data summarization. You can do all different types of analysis. You can explore data. You can present it in different ways. You can easily rearrange it. And I know it sounds maybe just a little bit complicated at this point, but you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It has drill down functionality. And again, it sounds pretty fancy, but it's not that difficult once I show you. And the great thing about it is that what you do in an Excel, in a pivot table, does not necessarily go back and change any of the information on the SQL database itself, the GP database. So it is a harmless way, for lack of better terms, of analyzing data, interacting with data, and doing it in a comfortable environment that most people are familiar with Excel. So if you're not familiar with a pivot table, let's go ahead and go back to, again, the paid invoices. If you notice that, and I wasn't paying attention, so my apologies, the report type actually has two different types of selections. You can either choose a list, which is your standard, and let me just publish that just for the sake of, and I'm going to go ahead and overwrite. Okay, because it's open, probably won't work. Okay. So let's try this once again. Going back to the paid invoices view, we're going to publish this as a list instead of as the pivot table. I went ahead and overwrote the report that was originally published, and so this way, this is how it's going to, if you don't select a pivot table selection and you just only select the list, this is how your report is going to be published. And all the information is here, so there's still, knowing Excel functionality, you can still do a lot. If you wanted to add manually a pivot table, I want to show you one other example. You can go in, select, let me go through this one more time. It's Insert tab, Pivot Table, Pivot Table. It'll automatically select the data, but just to ensure that it's encapsulating all of the data, you can choose an existing worksheet or a new worksheet. And this was the original, whenever I published the report, this is originally what was published. So it already publishes it in a pivot table. The other way, as I've already demonstrated, and let me go ahead and close this. Is just by selecting pivot table and publish and publish. Now when I open up the same report, rather than manually having to go in and use the Insert tab and Pivot Table, it's already here. So a pivot table, again, it allows you to basically put information in more of a understandable means. And if you wanted to, say for example, you can also use filters. As you can tell, I just dragged and dropped the vendor ID into the report filter. If I knew the particular vendor ID, I could just go ahead and use a search function here. If I wanted to select multiple items, all I'd have to do is select this and then select the particular vendor ID. But in this case, I just selected this particular vendor, and it will show me not only a total of the amount, but then the check number. And you can dress it up, of course, using the same pivot table functionality. If you were, for example, to change some things, and let me just, I'm going to actually take this off and add it. So let's just say we wanted to summarize, we wanted to do things from largest to smallest, and this is just some of the basic actually, just real quickly, you can do some conditional formatting. I mean, really, once you, and actually the thing that I just made a mistake on is you wouldn't want to include the sums, because obviously that would skew the conditional formatting. But I guess my point is that once you get it into an Excel, once you've published a report, now you're working with GP data, you have an ability to dress it the way that you want, to analyze it in the way that you want, in a native format that you're most comfortable with, rather than spending a tremendous amount of time trying to learn potentially another type of application or software. And for those of you that might be familiar with the analysis cubes, this is something in the same particular format, not exactly the same, but if you're familiar with analysis cubes, Excel Report Builder, you should also be familiar with. I mean, now that you've seen the format, not that difficult of a transition. Okay, so we went through creating a pivot table, and here are some resources that I would recommend. The Microsoft Dynamics GP 2010 reporting book is actually from an associate here at IBIS named David Duncan and Chris Liley. They co-authored the book, very experienced consultants, and used a lot of their information today. Also, the fixed assets example came from another associate here at IBIS named Amy Walsh, and here are the links. And I hope that everyone found today's webinar useful, hopefully not confusing, maybe gave you a bit more information at least than you started out with, and hopefully gave you some tools that you can proceed and do some self-service BI on your own. Okay, well, thank you so much for attending today. I hope that, again, that you got something useful out of it, and be on the lookout for some additional webinars from the GP team and Dynamics Care website. And thank you so much again.